to be that Tannehill type where they can kind of thread the needle there a little bit.
I've gone back and forth on this. I kind of think all it means is that Mariota is a significantly better NFL quarterback right now, and enough so that they will go out and publicly give the nod to the veteran rather than say, no, I know we brought you in, we told you you're going to be the bridge guy, but now you've got to compete with this third rounder. I don't know what I don't think it says much about Ridder yet, but it certainly doesn't say that he's, I don't think if he was Russell Wilson, like, I don't think they would be like, nope, Mariota's the guy. I think that there's a steep curve. I think it's really early. And I think that when in doubt, they're just going to give the nod to the veteran right now because there's no consequences for doing so, especially before the preseason.
What do you think, Garrett?
I mean, speaking of Russell Wilson, Matt Flynn was named the starter, right, coming into camp. That was the expectation. So it's hard to take a job away when you haven't really had much of an opportunity to do so. You're not going to take the job away in rookie minicamp, like that's just not going to happen. And then you have the veterans report from minicamp. You're not going to take the job away there. Where he does it is in training camp and with and these preseason games. And I think Desmond Ridder is going to receive every single opportunity to take this job away. But I think what Arthur Smith is doing, he's like saying, hey, you're going to have to come in and earn this. Marcus Mariota is the established starter. I have a rapport with this guy already. And if you're going to get it, come take it. And I think he's going to have every opportunity to do that, So I'm not taking this as an indictment on Desmond Ridder. It's been 2 months, so I can't say anything about that. We haven't even seen him in full pads, so I don't make anything of it. I think it was just a formality that Marcus Mariota was named the starter because somebody's got to come out and take reps with the ones. Someone's got to do it. So
it was just right away.
Like it was
after practice one. Like it was like, no, that's just over. This is not a competition. Like it was not
a competition. There's every single position outside of maybe a handful of positions on this team are up for grabs. This team is not good enough to have players who are just like, yep, that's your starter. Unless your name is like Jake Matthews or Caleb McGarry or Grady Jarrett.
I think
every single job in this organization is up for grabs. This team is not good enough to have jobs solidified at this point.
I think if we've learned anything about Arthur Smith, it's that he's meritocratic. Like if you're the better football player, especially on a bad football team, like you're gonna play. And so I think I read right before we got on that that Auden Tate's spot is in jeopardy, his roster spot.
Oh no!
And I thought that was interesting. That Cordero Hodges early on has been better, and we'll see what that means. But I think that they traded for Auden Tate, so they had some belief that he could make the roster and maybe have an impact. But if he's not the better player, he's not going to get that spot. Like there's a bunch of receivers competing for those receiver spots, and there's about 3 guys locked in to that roster. And beyond that, like the better player is going to play. And so I think that we have to be careful with the quarterback thing because it's like competition or not competition. And it's always a competition. Like Marcus Mariota is not good enough to be like, have a bad camp and like be able to weather that because he's a veteran. But there's somewhere in between, like an open competition. This is a 1A, 1B situation. And this is entrenched 1 and 2. They're both going to get their reps. The better player is going to end up playing. And I think we do have to exercise some patience because Ridder's not just going to play because we need to know if Ridder's any good. And I know that fans will probably want that. I will want that. But it's not just going to happen because they need to evaluate Ridder. If he's not the better quarterback, he's not going to play.
Yeah, and that would be a disservice to Desmond Ridder in this organization if you put him in and he's not ready to play. It would be the same thing as what we saw last year with Jalen Mayfield. Jalen Mayfield was not ready to play left guard in the National Football League last year, and we saw what happened. And Desmond Ridder will be coming in and playing a much more difficult position, And at the end of the day, it's like I think I trust Arthur Smith at this point to make the right decision and put the best guy on the football field. I don't think he's tied to Marcus Mariota. In fact, I don't think he's tied to anybody on this team. And I think I don't know if it was on this podcast or on my show or wherever else I said it, but this whole team, like the whole identity of this squad in 2022, I call them the Prove It Falcons because you had so many teams, so many players on this roster who may or may not be here next year. Like whether or not they put any stock into you, most guys on this team have expiring deals within the next 2 years. and lots of cap space comes into the organization next year. They can replace you just like that. And so at the end of the day, it's like if Desmond Ridder doesn't work out, great. You'll be picking at the top of the draft. If Marcus Mariota doesn't work out, great. We got Desmond Ridder right here. He's going to replace you. Like that goes for just about every single position on this field. And look, the prove it Falcons. That's the way I see it.
That's interesting. And I also just think it's like one of those things where I think it eases some stuff where it doesn't put the pressure on Desmond Ridder right away, where it's like, it's okay that it might take you a while. It just inspires confidence for Marcus Mariota. They're like, hey, this is your job. This is your team. Don't worry about it. Like, hey, if you play well, you don't have to worry about Desmond Ridder. And like you said, it's a meritocracy here in Atlanta at this point. But I also just think that like Falcons fans who are worried or where that means I'm like, Desmond Ridder's going to get in the game. Like Marcus Mariota is not playing 17 games. Like this has not happened yet. So until he proves otherwise that like he can stay healthy for that amount of time, we're going to see Desmond Ridder. My worry is I feel like Mariota makes it to like week 16, 15 or something. And then Ridder is playing like garbage time the last couple of weeks with a bunch of guys who have already checked out. And we don't get a good read on what he is because Mariota made it the majority of the season. And then you're like, well, Ridder balled out in those last couple of weeks again, and when the games didn't matter, and we were already eliminated from playoff contention and all that kind of stuff. That like, man, that makes it more complicated if this season goes poorly, and we only get a couple weeks of Ridder, and then you're like, oh, we're picking in the top 3 or 4, and Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, whoever it is right there, and we're like, we don't have enough tape to really know what Ridder is. Like that will be just. I hope that's not the case, but that's a possibility.
My dream scenario is that Will Anderson's there. I want Will Anderson so badly, but Max, you go ahead.
Well, I think that's kind of a problem that'll take care of itself because we know that the best case of Marcus Mariota isn't even good enough to withstand. If Ridder's doing his job in practice, then he will play. Like if he is progressing, he will play. And if he's not progressing, that tells us something too. Like if he's not played by week 15, 16, that also tells us something about his development in a way that like, I think the quarterback thing next year is more going to come down to whether they love one of the guys at the top less than, I mean, unless Ridder is like, you know, a total gem and he has a great year. I think it really comes down to like, do they believe Bryce Young is a franchise guy? Do they believe C.J. Stroud's a franchise guy? Tyler Van Dyke, whoever you want to say. And if they don't, then they have to feel okay with what they have. If they do, it probably doesn't matter what Ridder or Mariota, for that matter, does. But like what Garrett's talking about, like I think what it'll really come down to is like if they have the choice between Will Anderson, generational pass rusher, and a quarterback that they really like a lot, but maybe aren't like this is like a top 5 guy in the league. That's where you can sort of break the tie of like, we like what Ridder did for us this year. Let's give him another year. Let's see what he's got. Let's take this pass rusher because we haven't had a pass rusher like that maybe ever on the entire franchise. And let's just build from there. And I think that's an exciting option too. But what I will say is I think when I'm reading these reports, it's so different from other Falcon seasons because we're not trying necessarily to like figure out who's in the 2 deep or who, you know, how this is going to play out for, you know, who's going to play when. It's more about like, all right, is Ebiketie progressing well? Is, you know, Troy Anderson progressing well? Is Drake London, you know, who we thought he was? And it's more about these like individual young guys and their development than it is like, what does this mean for this season? And I think that that's kind of the approach I'm taking with all of it, including a quarterback.
And it kind of makes this season a little bit more interesting, like on a deeper level, you know? Because I think for most teams or most fans, I guess, you're going to be like, all right, how many wins does this team have? That's just not the way that I'm going to judge this team in 2022 because this team could win 2 games and it'd be a more successful season than if we won 5, if that makes sense. Like at the end of the day, it's like, are we seeing the progression from Arthur Smith? Because I think he is the guy to continue to develop this team. At least right now, that's my expectation for him. And I mean, if this team wins 2 games and we actually see, hey, Desmond Ridder can do this job. And hey, Arnold Ebiketie, like he's playing good football. Like he can make that next step. Kyle Pitts, I mean, he's scoring touchdowns, you know, and like he can be the next great tight end. That's more of a successful season than if they win 5 games and Marcus Mariota plays the whole season. And you're like, all right, great. Now what?
I 100% agree. And I think it's like it's more about that you don't judge it on wins and losses. You're judging it on how many answers you get. And that can be as simple as like, if Jalen Mayfield is a starting caliber guard, that's an answer. That's a positive answer that you got from this season. And it looks like he's probably going to start again. He's in a competition, but I think he's going to win that job. And you'll learn, if he is a starting caliber guard in the NFL, that's an answer that you don't have to address in free agency next year. And that is, you can move forward with it. If Arnold Ebiketie is like a 8 to 10 sack a year guy, and you kind of can pencil that in now, that is a real answer that you have that you can feel good about. If Drake London and Kyle Pitts is what you think it can be, that is an answer. And so it doesn't matter, like, did you win that game 17-14 or did you lose it? Like, they're probably going to lose a lot of games this year. And so it kind of doesn't matter. But there's scales of those answers too. Like if Ritter is the answer, that is a huge answer.
Yeah. And just as important, it's that they can find out who isn't an answer and who they can move on from. Like if they have a guy on the, like, I don't know, Matt Hennessy, if he continues to struggle, Jalen Mayfield, if he continues to struggle, great. Okay, on to the next thing. You know what you need to address. Like if Desmond Ritter comes in and he's terrible, it just doesn't show anything, which I don't think is going to be the case. Then you know that you can move on and you can go get that guy. So
the only doomsday scenario is if Mayfield, Hennessy, Dahlman, and McGarry all struggle. That's the doomsday, because it's like you're not solving all of that in one offseason. Like you need some of these to hit, and like you can have one of these not work out and be like, all right, we got to move on next year. But if Hennessy's not the answer, Mayfield's not the answer, and McGarry's not the answer, I'm very, very concerned about the next couple of years in Atlanta.
Well, I think you can sort of see the outlines of what a rebuild is going to look like. And I think an overhaul of the offensive line is borderline inevitable. Like I think they already know on McGarry, and it's just a matter of seeing it through. Like he's not a disaster at right tackle, but I don't think he is the answer, and I think they know that. But it's more like, okay, if the O-line is the focus next offseason, you can overhaul an offensive line in one offseason. But that severely limits your resources elsewhere, right? And so you hope that you have your two answers at safety, who, by the way, are taking first-team reps, the young guys. You have answers at linebacker that you feel good about. You have pass rushers. D'Angelo Malone maybe is a guy, or I can't pronounce his name, the guy from Notre Dame who was a rookie last year,
Gage.
Yeah. Maybe he's a guy. He flashed a little bit last year, and then Ebiketie. And so you put together these answers of, okay, maybe you do have a good, solid, young defensive core, then you can build around a revamped offensive line, and who knows, maybe a rookie quarterback. And that's that's a really strong position to start from, but you need to get those answers on defense if you're going to focus on the offensive line.
Plus, I mean,
and so I think,
with the cap space that you're going to have next year, you can fix a lot of issues. Go into the free agency market, go get a veteran guard, go get a veteran center. I mean, you saw the difference that I'm not saying that there's going to be an Alex Mack out there at center, but at the same time, you add a guy like that veteran presence on that offensive line, it took that team to a Super Bowl. And I think Alex Mack was the most important person on that offense that nobody talked about. That the difference between 2015, where you win 8 games, and 2016, where you go to a Super Bowl. One of those things is Alex Mack. And I think you can do that in free agency, and you can do that on the offensive line in a way that you can't do in other ways. And look, if you have $65 million to spend, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And that's a lot of answers that you can potentially get next year.
And I think, you could, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but you could see a redux of the Matt Ryan draft, where you go quarterback at the top, and then you dip back in at the end of the first round and you grab a tackle. And then you got Jake Matthews and you got your tackle, bookend tackles, and then you figure it out on the interior. And that's a lot. I mean, it's a lot cheaper in free agency to work from the interior than on your tackles.
I'm okay with that. Question, Garrett, if you had to guess right now, it is July 29th. This time next year, we're talking about the season review or something for the receivers here. Who do you think leads the Falcons in receptions this year? Who do you think actually gets the most receptions this year? Not targets, receptions.
Kyle Pitts.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume. I mean, you're building through. I mean, you drafted him fourth overall. You drafted him 4th overall last year, so we better be getting a lot of them. We better be right there at the top. Drake London could be the guy. I mean, it could be any number of guys. I mean, it's got to be Kyle Pitts just because of what you've invested in the guy. And I think that Arthur Smith wants to feature him more, and then based off of, I mean, year 1 to year, I just don't think Drake London's going to be there yet. Drake London, I think a good season for him is something that we saw from Kyle Pitts last year. 800 yards, 3-4
I think he has more upside in terms of immediate targets, receptions.
Yeah, coach, he's playing on the outside, and it's not as hard to learn. All due respect, I mean, it's not as hard to learn the position to play wide receiver in the NFL compared to tight end. Tight end is a much more difficult position to learn.
We're just seeing rookie receivers ball out immediately. Like there's so many that ball out immediately.
Concepts have been simplified for wide receivers, and they let them feature their athleticism a little bit more. And look, he could be that guy. Kyle Pitts has more upside. I'd say just from the jump from year 1 to year 2, I think is going to be very large. I think the way that they're going to want to play, I think Kyle Pitts is going to he's going to be a featured point.